This audio is brought to you by Muslim Central. Please consider donating to help cover our running costs and future projects by visiting www.muslimcentral.com/donate.
This begins CD number 2.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I'd like to make a few comments and then I'd like to ask a question for Imam Hamza. First of all, this was a beautiful introduction and extremely beneficial. One of the points that we want to make in beginning this exposure to the Islamic theological tradition is the fact that in the things that we discuss, there are certain aspects of it that were regarded to be obligatory. And as we go through the theological discussions in the upcoming sessions, we'll try to make that clear, that certain things that we declare and witness and see about God are obligatory for Muslims to believe, and other things are not. So it's important to know that just as in law, you have the obligatory and the prohibited, and you have the recommended and the disliked, and you have the neutral. So also in theological discussion, you have that which is obligatory, that which is forbidden. You have that which is recommended, that which is disliked, and you have that which is neutral. And a lot of the abstruse points of theology we've tried to leave out because they're not obligatory. However, the obligatory aspects of theology, such as knowing the 13 attributes that we'll discuss today, this is obligatory. And every Muslim is supposed to know that. And this is the first obligation of Islam, to know this knowledge. It's a very precious knowledge, a very valuable knowledge. But the first obligation that you have, even before you learn to make ablution and prayer, is to know what is required of you about your Creator. Now, having said that, when I went to one of the great teachers that I was blessed to be with for many years, the first requirement that he made of me was to learn theology. And as I began to study the text that he gave me, I encountered the necessary, the possible, and the impossible. The traditional theologians, like traditional Islamic thinkers, most of their reason is based on the belief that in the logical world, in the realm of reason, there is a necessary dimension, such as a triangle must have 3 angles, and the sum of those is 180. And then there is the impossible, which can never exist, and then there is the possible. And as an American with a Western background, I didn't really understand even what that meant. And when it said that these are the 3 categories, there is no fourth, I had to ask, why is there no fourth? So today, in the age of quantum physics and curved space, when we ask about a triangle, we think about, well, what would a triangle be in curved space? These traditional categories, which are very strong, because if you know the necessary, the possible, and the impossible, you can prove God just from existence and non-existence. You just need to have 2 absolute opposites, and you can work out incredible arguments from that. But it's not very meaningful for us today. So my question to Sheikh Hamza is, these proofs of God, which were such an important part of our intellectual legacy, and which affected the Europeans also, as he said, how can we make these meaningful for us today in an age where proofs about God are not just intellectual exercises, but where they're actually necessary for a people who live in doubt, and many of whom, or most of whom, don't even believe?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's interesting because to me that was one of the most interesting things when I was studying that, and that was explained to me. And Imam As-Sanusi, who's one of the great formulators of creeds in Islamic tradition, he actually said that the difference between a rational person and an irrational person was an irrational person could not distinguish between the three different types of propositions, which are the rational propositions, the empirical propositions, and the revelatory propositions. He said if you couldn't do that, he couldn't consider you aql, like an intelligent person or a rational person. And traditionally that was what people learned. The Muslims generally relied on what's called in the West a cosmological argument for the existence of God. The arguments for the existence of God fall into three categories in the West generally. Arguments from reason, which are called ontological arguments, and there's a few different versions of that. The most famous is Saint Anselm, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury from the 13th century. And then the second most famous is Descartes, which is a slightly modified version of that. And that's still it's also a modern, that's probably the one that's had the most lasting power because it's the most difficult to deal with. And then the second is those arguments from the world, that argue from the world, the existence of the world, and those are cosmological arguments. And the most famous, and even the Western formulation of the cosmological argument is St. Thomas Aquinas, who got it from the Muslims, because it is a Muslim argument. And there is a version of that now in Western philosophy because of Watt's contribution called the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God, which is now in textbooks in philosophy. They're beginning to have chapters on that, because they recognize that the Muslim contribution was a unique contribution. And then the third category is what are called teleological, which are arguments for the existence of God from particulars in the world. There's a fourth, which is Kant's, because Kant, when he wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, which he basically gave very powerful arguments against all three of those. And since then, since Kant, they haven't been, you can't take them seriously, as they say in philosophy. But he did it in order to introduce his proof. So he wasn't trying to destroy those proofs. What he was trying to do is put it on a stronger foundation, and he introduced the moral argument for the existence of God. And there is a fifth argument, which is really the true Muslim argument for the existence of God, which is called the fitra argument. And there is a version of that in the West, which is called the common sense argument for the existence of God, which is that the majority of human beings do believe in the noumenal realm. They believe that there is intelligent power behind the universe. And that's the overwhelming majority of human beings. And that is the fitrah. And we believe that. You can have misunderstandings of that, like in animism, naturalism, pantheism, but there's still a basic understanding. Atheism is actually a small minority, and it's an anti-fitra group because they're always people. You'll never get children that are atheists. It's extremely rare. I know of somebody, a German Jewish philosopher, that did say that he was an atheist by 8, which I find really, that would be hard to believe. Although Muslims do believe that you can have aql before puberty, so you can be rational before puberty, and 7 is what's called sinnu tamyiz. So from that point of view, it might be. But children that are still in a fitra state will not. We don't believe that. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ said, that children are born on fitra. And children are deeply spiritual, and there's only one book that I know of, which was published in Harvard on the spirituality of children. Most children have no problem understanding God. And one of the interesting things about children is that they do not question the will of God. A child will never say, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve this. Like if a child gets cancer, they won't get angry that they've got cancer. And anybody that's ever worked in cancer wards, pediatric cancer wards, will testify to this. They're very accepting of what happens to them. And I read a book by a man who lost his eyesight when he was a young boy, and he said he was so happy that it was when he was a child, because had he been an adult, he probably would have gotten angry at God. But because he was a child, he just accepted it. What I find, personally, for myself, is I find whenever I read the Quran with tadabbur, I get increase in my iman. I mean, I have found that in my own personal life. And I know a son of a scholar who's also a scholar who told me that he went through a period of a lot of doubt in his life. And his father, who was a great commentator of the Quran, told him to read the Quran and ponder its meanings. And he said that that was a healing for him. And I personally believe that our greatest proof is the Quran. But the Quran's a very difficult book. It's easy from one perspective, but it's very difficult from another perspective. And I think anybody that says otherwise is just doing a disservice to Revelation. That's why it's always talking about ulul albab, people of innermost pith, people of intellect. So in terms of proofs, I'm interested. The thing about the West is that they're still thinking about this stuff very seriously. And they do take God seriously at one level. They're on both sides. People like Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, who's an evolutionist, just really wants to prove that God doesn't exist. Stephen Hawking is another one. His goal in life is to prove that the universe does not need a God. I mean, he's actually stated that. And his wife left him because she was a devout Christian. And she actually got to the point where she just could not live with him. So there are people that, that's how serious. And that's why I'm saying they take it very serious. And I would say that for us, there are really interesting developments, what they call the anthropic principle, the strong and weak anthropic principle. One of the things that there's a lot of evidence that there is not life in other parts of the universe because all of the necessary things that would have to come together in order for life to exist are just, it's mind-boggling. And they've studied this. Just the resonance of atoms, what they're resonating at. The solar system, the actual distance we are from the sun, the biosphere, the gases, the coming together of all the gases. It just goes on and on and on. That's very interesting. The teleological proof for the existence of God, which is what they sometimes call the design proof, is also having a revival. People like, I think it's called Behe or Behe or B, I don't know, Behe, who wrote Darwin's Black Box. He's a chemist from University of Pennsylvania, I think. And in that book, he argues that the cell is far too complicated to be explained by evolution. There's just not enough time because we have reasonable estimates of how long our solar system has been here. And he says that statistically it's just not possible. There has to be design behind the cell because Darwin made the assumption that the protoplasma was a simple substance. He did not think that it would get more complicated as you went into the cell. He thought it would get more simple. And his idea being that evolution comes from simplicity, it moves into complexity. What they're finding is it gets more complex the more you go down. And so these people are they're making interesting arguments. There's also been some really interesting moral arguments that have been developed. There's a book called Evidence for God that was written by a lawyer. He was in the Reagan administration. He argues that, he said, for years I was just a Machiavellian nihilistic politician, and he said, I don't care what you say, if you don't have a foundation for morality based in the transcendent, there is no foundation. It doesn't matter. You can argue rational, secular, humanist principles all you want. In the end of the day, if you choose to be a moral person because you think somehow there's a rational basis for it, there's 100 million other people out there that can say, well, I choose not to be moral because I don't find a rational basis for it. So I don't like you, I can kill you. And unfortunately, there's people like that. Literally, people like that just have no qualms about killing people. So I think that we as Muslims have a lot of work to do. We need to study our texts. We can laugh at our scholars in some clever way. I would never do that, but I'm just saying people that get very clever can think, oh, well, those proofs aren't really... all those proofs are still problems. These things have not been resolved. And so we need to look deeply at our scholars. We need to assess. A lot of these books have not been read for centuries. And I'm not joking. A lot of our books have not been read for centuries. So we don't know what we even have. And I would really encourage, I think people, I would not go into theology without a grounding in our tradition, personally. I think it's a very dangerous thing to do. And I think that if you go into philosophy, it's very dangerous. I personally would warn against that. And it's a fard kifaya to know what's out there. I mean, that is a fard kifaya. Radd al-shubuhat, what's called refutation of obfuscations, is a fard kifaya. It's a collective obligation upon the ummah. And we have to have people that study. And the thing about Imam al-Ghazali is he learned the entire philosophical tradition of his age. I mean, he learned it. Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi said he swallowed it whole. And when he wanted to vomit it up, he couldn't. In other words, it became part of his discourse and his understanding, and you see it in his writings. He was absolute genius. But we have people scoff at evolution who've never studied biology. And I'm sorry, that is just not an argument. That's called taqleed, where you just argue because, well, it doesn't agree with the Quran, therefore it's wrong. Why? Because the Quran is from God. Well, why is the Quran from God? Because God said so. Where did God say so? In the Quran. And this is the type of circular reasoning that drives scientific people insane about religious people, because what they say basically then is that your religion is not based on foundation. It's based on basic beliefs that have no foundation. And a basic belief is a belief without foundation. Right? A basic belief, if I say, why do you believe that? I don't need to tell you why. I just believe it. And our ulama accept that as a belief in God, and I respect that. I don't disrespect that at all. But our scholars cannot be like that. The people that debate, the people that write books, the people that, they can't be like that, because then you have no proofs. I mean, that's what the hujjah is. That's why Imam al-Ghazali was hujjat al-Islam, because he could sit down with anybody and stand firm in his faith, not just with naql, but with aql as well, with both.
We have about 15 minutes, so I'd like to do some rapid-fire questions that I think Imam Hamza could very quickly answer. Some of them were just factual in nature. Imam Hamza, could you just please list the names of the three scholars, the three central scholars to the development of the creed? I think a lot of people miss that, because I think if you could just restate them in the dates.
The earliest is Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, who was a Hanafi scholar from Egypt. He's also considered one of the greatest Hanafi fuqaha, and has a book in which he argues for the strength of that madhab over the other madhabs. That's still very well respected. And he dies in 321. And then he wrote, his famous creed is Al-Aqeedah, Al-Tahawiyah. And then the next one is Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, who's 333. And he was born in Basra and studied the rationalists for many, many years, and was considered to be he was going to be the inheritor of that. And then finally Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, who is the theologian of the Hanafi school generally. I mean, the Hanafis have a traditional school of naql through the Tahawi, but generally most Hanafis traditionally follow the Maturidi school. And obviously the Hanafis take 80% of the ummah with them, because they are the dominant school, both in Aqeedah and in fiqh. I think that I really believe that Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, in many ways, his understanding of the Sharia is probably the most congruous with the modern world, I think. That's my personal... I don't know enough about... I'm speaking as a generalist in that area, because I'm not a specialist in... I barely know... What I know in the Maliki madhab is limited, so I don't want to go into the other schools and speak for them. But that, in basically studying usul and in seeing the differences that he had in the other imams, and I use a lot of his, when I'm asked questions, I'll give a Hanafi answer to non-Muslims, because it's just easier to swallow for a lot of modern people. So,
Imam Hamza, could you also recommend a book or a short list of books on the specific subject of these philosophers, these theologians? A lot of people have been writing in for...
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good material that I've seen. Montgomery Watt has done, I think, reasonably good work. He wrote a book on Islamic philosophy and theology, and he does cover the schools reasonably well. He's an Orientalist, and he has his perspectives, but he's fair-minded. He's not, I don't think he's a bad person. I mean, you get some people that definitely have an axe to grind, but we need good material on this stuff. I mean, there's Hodgson's in The Venture of Islam. He has a section on Kalam, which is also quite good. And then there's a good book on synthetic theology that was written by I think he's Bosnian, that was published by the Malaysian University there for International Islamic University in Malaysia. And I can't remember what his... I think it's Celic, C-E-L-I-C. I think that's what it is. So, and that's on the Maturidi philosophy or Kalam, but he does go into he does talk about the differences. And that's quite good. I mean, that's Zu's PhD thesis.
Imam Hamza, can you also restate the names of Imam al-Muhasibi, and then you mentioned several others in that category?
Yeah, I mean, the famous ones, Imam al-Muhasibi is probably the earliest formulator. And then Imam al-Junayd is, in a sense, if Imam al-Muhasibi is the Abu Hanifa of that science, Imam Shafi'i Imam al-Junayd is like the Shafi'i. He gives it a schema, and he develops the doctrine of fana and baqa, which are very important. And I want to say something about Shibli and Abu Talib al-Makki, who wrote Qut al-Qulub, very early, respected by all the ulama. And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, quotes extensively from Abu Talib al-Makki. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah does. Imam Junayd was an imam by consensus. He's mujma' ala imamatihi. And anybody that says he wasn't an imam is just ignoring what the ummah agreed on, the Sunni tradition. I mean, there's no doubt about Imam al-Junayd. There are Sufis that are considered wayward and off the path and deviant. I mean, there are. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't just say all tasawwuf is deviant, because it's not true, and it's not the normative practice of the tradition. Sheikhs and tariqah is another thing, and people conflate the tariqah and shuyukh and pirs and bay'ah. They conflate that with this tasawwuf, and that is a false... You cannot put them together. Tasawwuf is a science. It has its teachers, and traditionally many of those teachers they also created a certain type of systematization, and in it they had this idea of suhbah. The Turks called it suhbat, where you sat and spent time, and some had a formalized practice of bay'ah, where you took bay'ah, but it's not a legally binding bay'ah like the khilaf al-kubra or something like that, and it was something that people could get out of and things like that. So that does exist in the tradition. There is an idea, and many of our great scholars did have tariqah, and many of them were actually shuyukh of tariqah. But there's been a lot of abuse of tariqah as well. And a lot of people have, because they've seen a lot of wrongs done in the name of Sufism, they end up attacking tasawwuf. And it's not. It is a science. And it's considered one of the things about true science, according to modern philosophers of science, like Karl Popper, is that science is falsifiable. In other words, if you can't falsify it, it's not valid. So if you have water and you want to prove whether or not the freezing point is indeed 32 degrees Fahrenheit, well, what you do is you create several experiments where you freeze it and determine, because you have to allow for maybe the thermometer didn't work and other things. You don't just do it once. You do it again and again. And if it keeps coming up, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when it freezes, then you can falsify it. Because if I could prove that it freezes at 34 or 28, I falsified the claim that it freezes at 32. If I can't do that, then it's considered valid science. Now, there's obviously anomalous things that can come in later on, and that happens. Like quantum mechanics throws a spanner in Newtonian physics. But that's another problem. Now, in tasawwuf, there is this exact same idea. It is falsifiable. That there are states and stations that happen to people in suluk that are identical states and stations. And they've been described, and people that have been through them know whether or not it's a valid experience or whether or not it's not. And Imam al-Muhasibi divided it into Rabbani, Malakani, Nafsani, and Shaitani. That those are the different types of impulses that occur to the soul. Lordly, angelic, selfish, and satanic. And he gave very specific signs for each one of those, so that you could know if a thought came to you, you could know if it came from Allah, if it came from an angel, if it came from the selfish nature, or if it came from the devil, based on this. And his point was it could be replicated in all human beings, and therefore it had a validity because you could falsify it.
I'd just like to add that in light of what Imam Hamza just said, that talking about Karl Popper and the fact that science, any valid scientific theory must offer itself for disproof. And with regard to the proofs of God, that there would be another category which is default proof, because of the fact that there is no proof for his non-existence. And the ancient Chinese, the ancient Indians, the ancient Greeks, among them were skeptics and disbelievers who attempted to disprove the existence of God. Just as today we have Hawkings and others who attempt to do that. But probably in comparison with other arguments, their arguments would be regarded to be no better in any way. In fact, to have a lot of presumptions in them that make them defective. So there's also the default argument, which is that you cannot disprove God's existence. And that would be a scientific proof.
Dr. Omar, you mentioned this idea of the required beliefs, the forbidden beliefs, the permissible beliefs, the disliked beliefs. So there seems to be some confusion. Could you perhaps give an example of each?
Yes. For example, to believe that God exists is obligatory. To believe that God has omniscience is obligatory. To believe that God has omnipotence, power over all things, is obligatory. To believe, however, in things like what the theologians called relationships or relations, namely that power relates to all things over which God has power in various ways. Some are sufficient, some are efficient. Some are sufficient pre-existent, some are sufficient temporal. That's not required. There are in theology very important discourses that are essentially philosophical, and that often pertain to things like how does the one relate to the many? How do the many relate to the one? Very important, but they're also somewhat abstruse, and therefore they're not obligatory beliefs. You don't have to understand, and you don't have to believe in the relations. And
prohibited belief.
I'm sorry?
An example of a prohibited belief, forbidden belief.
Well, a prohibited...
Prohibited?
Like the eternity of the world,
right,
for example.
Well, also an example that Imam al-Ghazali gives is astrology. I mean, the dominant opinion amongst the ulama is that astrology is invalid. I mean, that's the majority of ulama said that. Some ulama actually did not, and they practiced it. But they're all in agreement that if you believe that there's celestial influence, that's a prohibited belief. Whereas if you believe that there was a correlation between what happens on earth and celestial formations, they said that was not a prohibited belief. In other words, that if the moon is in Mars and certain things occur at the same time on Earth, but you don't believe that they do so because of the moon being in Mars, but that God has set them up to happen at the same time, then they said that was not kufr.
There's something that's also very important in this, and that's an excellent question, by the way. But that what is it obligatory to believe? Why are certain things obligatory and others are not? And here, one of the great credits of Islam and civilization is the fact that obligatory beliefs must be muhkam. They must be utterly definitive, categorical. They must be qat'i. They cannot be conjectural. They cannot be sectarian. They cannot be matters that are beyond consensus. Things that are beyond consensus, particular views about for example, attributes of creation or attributes of sensation, those cannot be obligatory because of the fact that they are not categorical. This is a great credit to us, and this is also very important for us as Muslims because of the fact that there is a basis to the faith which is absolutely indicated in the Quran and the Sunnah and reason, and that all Muslims are supposed to believe. That's a matter of consensus. And then there are tangents off of that, some of which may be as precious as diamonds, but they are not required, they're not categorical. And to introduce anything into the category of belief, of obligatory belief, which is not qat'i, which is not definitive, that is a major innovation. And often you will see that the issues that divide Muslims most bitterly are exactly of that nature. For example, anthropomorphic verses. The most merciful assumed the throne. So here we have different positions we take about that. Some literal interpretations would be out of the picture. But if you want to hold that as it is and not interpret it, that's all right. And if you want to interpret it validly, that's all right. But to insist on any of those positions would be innovation. To say that you cannot interpret this in any way, that would be an innovation. So I think that I've made myself clear. And that, as a principle of conduct for us, is very, very important because always in Islam there are certain things that are the basis of the faith that we all agree upon, and that must always be the basis upon which we function. I'd just like to say in ending that Arius of Alexandria, the great Christian theologian in our view, the great Christian theologian of the 3rd century and 4th century of the Christian period, his approach to the Bible was essentially Islamic, in that he believed in the Bible very much like the Bible we have today, but he insisted that belief in the church be only things that are definitive, and that anything that lends itself to interpretation regarding the sonship of Christ, for example, must be interpreted in a way that is valid with those principles. And in the Quran, when it says minhu ayatun muhkamatun hunna ummul kitab, of the book there are verses that are definitive. They are the foundation of the book. This, according to some scholars, was revealed about Trinitarian Christians who visited the Prophet in Medina from Najran, who were arguing for Trinitarian theology on the basis of the ambiguous verses of the Quran. And in fact, Arius of Alexandria, in his arguments with Athanasius and others, the proponents of the Trinity, this was his position always. The Bible is very clear that God is one, that He is pre-existent, that He has no likeness. And that's also our basis in the faith.
This concludes the session.
So without further ado, right thinking regarding God, Dr. Umar Faruq Abd-Allah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا برحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. O God, give us wisdom and shower us with your mercy. This session and the next are the most academic of the 5. And here we talk about the core issues of Islamic theology. Islamic belief is more than theology. Theology is the study of God. And that is the beginning, and that is the primary focus of Islamic belief. Then, in addition to that, there is belief about the prophets, and next to that, there is belief about the last days and the various things that the prophets have taught us about judgment and the world, resurrection of the dead, and so forth. In this conference, we are only dealing with the first, which is theology. So we're not going to deal with the other issues. And when we talk about theology and the attributes of God in particular, which are essential to that, they were broken down into 3 categories. The first is what is called the self-attribute, the attribute of self, or the essential attribute. And it is one, and it is existence. which I'll speak about a little bit before Imam Hamza speaks. The second category of beliefs are called the negating attributes. As-sifat was-salbiyah. The negating attributes, which are 5, and Imam Hamza will speak about those. And if you don't get them now, you'll get them later, because we'll repeat them all. But they are pre-existence, eternity or sempiternity, eternity in all future time, incomparability, that God is different from everything, and self-sufficiency, that He needs nothing, and oneness, that He is one God, in essence, in attributes, in act. Then we have another category of attributes which are called the qualities or the qualitative attributes. And these are 7. They're called also the lordly attributes, the attributes of adornment. And we'll talk about those this evening, inshallah. Those are life and knowledge, speech, will, power, seeing, and hearing. These 13 attributes are obligatory in the belief of every Muslim. Every Muslim needs to know about this regarding God, and they need to have a correct understanding of it. So this was always the core of Islamic theology. And we'll talk about it, inshallah, as best we can. But this is very important. Now, we begin with an introduction about God, and then to talk about the first category of belief, which is the essential attribute, the attribute of existence. Before then we talk about the other attributes. And I'd like to begin by speaking a little bit about the names of God. This is an issue that we'll talk about from time to time, especially tomorrow. It's something that we'll talk about in much more detail. And I'd like to begin with the name Allah. This is the greatest name of God. This is, for us, the supreme name. It is the name that includes all other names, that refers to all attributions, all qualities, all negating attributes. It is the best name. And the honor in which this name is held, not only by Muslims but by Arabs from ancient time, is indicated by the fact that it is pronounced in a unique way. It is given tafkhim, which means emphasis. So that if we were to pronounce the word according to standard modes of Arabic pronunciation, we would say Allah, Allahu. But instead we say Allah, Allahu. And that change in diction is tafkhim, emphasis for the sake of reverence, emphasis to indicate the dignity of the being who is spoken about. The scholars of Islam, especially grammarians, differ about this beautiful name in terms of whether it is derivative or not. Many of them said that it was derivative. It comes from El-Ilah, the God. Sibawayh, who is the greatest of the grammarians, was of that opinion. Others held, and they had their arguments, that it is not derivative at all. It is directly posited in the Arabic language as the name of the necessary being, the creator of the world. However, when we look at the word Allah in terms of its being a Semitic word in Arabic, which is one of the prime Semitic languages, then it has great similarity to the words that most of the Semites used for thousands of years to speak about the Creator and to speak about God. In Hebrew, its parallel is the word Eloh, Eloh, which means God. And in Hebrew, it's often said Ha-Eloh, the God, meaning El-Ilah. One of the most common words for God in the Bible is Elohim. which is a plural, but it's a plural of majesty, not of number. And it corresponds to Allah. In old dictionaries of Syriac and Arabic and so forth, then Elohim was translated as Allah. They're related to each other. In Chaldean, in Syriac, in Aramaic, which are all similar tongues of the ancient Middle East, the word is Allah. 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 Almost the same. And the word for God in Syriac is Allah. Allah. Jesus, peace be upon him, who spoke the Syriac language, Aramaic, the Semitic words of the gospel are in Aramaic, he would have called God Allah. So he used a word for God that is very similar to the word Allah that we use. So this word has a deep root in the Semitic heritage. It is a precious word, and it's very much like the words that the Jews and the Christians, the Hebrews and others used in their Semitic tongues. Those who hold that the word Allah is derivative and has a meaning, namely that it's El-Ilah, they say that what the word means is he who is worshipped. Eliha meaning to worship. Ilah meaning the worshipped one, like the word kitab means the written thing, maktub. Or like the word bisat means a carpet that is spread out. So it has a passive sense of being the object of worship, and it has that in the form ilah, fi'al, as they would say in Arabic morphology. Going on from that, however, in Islam there are many words for God. All of you know that. And the names of God are infinite, as His attributes also are infinite. The attributes that we must know are 13, but the attributes that He has are infinite, many of them beyond our knowledge in this world and the next world. His names also are infinite in number, and they're also in many languages. In the Quran and in the authentic sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there are more than 150 names of God. The famous hadith of Abu Hurairah that God has 99 names, which if anyone preserves them, keeps them, or memorizes them, embodies them, he enters or she paradise. This hadith does not mean that God has only 99 names. But what it means is that there are 99 special names, which, if you learn those and keep them, keep the trust that regards them, as some people say, or embody them in your belief and conduct, then you go to paradise. But God, Allah, has many more than 99 names, even in the Quran and the Hadith themselves. Over 150 authentic names. One of the distinctive signs of the greatness of our religion, in the view of many of the greatest Islamic scholars, is the fact that our Prophet, peace be upon him, gave us so many names of God, all of which are with prophetic authority, so that we are able to understand the Creator, whose names manifest His acts and His dealing with the cosmos better than any other people. But the names of God, just like belief in God, are a universal legacy. All the children of Adam, all human beings in all time, have this natural disposition that we have, which has in it the inherent knowledge of God, of good and evil, and many other things. They are born believers, as our Prophet said, peace be upon him, and prophets were sent to all people. So that the names of God are a universal legacy. Wilhelm Schmidt, a German anthropologist who was very famous in the 20th century and wrote a huge study of primitive religion, which today we call micro-religion. The religions of little people. We don't say primitive anymore. It's not politically correct, and it's also not anthropologically accurate. But he showed in this huge work of his that the micro-peoples all over the world, from the Eskimos to the Pygmies to the Aleuts and other people, they all know the Supreme Being. And their religions are very similar to the religion of pre-Islamic Arabia. The type of associations they do are like those of the pre-Islamic Arabs. They regard him as one, and they have many names for him. And these names, as he shows in his voluminous work, usually are remarkably beautiful. They express the attributes of oneness, uniqueness, pre-existence, that he existed before all creation, sempiternity, that he lasts forever, omnipotence, justice, and so forth. The ancient Egyptians worshipped many gods. Most of their gods were creator gods, originally, who were then joined together in a pantheon because of political conquest. So when people were conquered, their creator god was made another god next to the others. But in the Egyptian tongue, as we know it today, the ancient Egyptian tongue, there are over 120 names for the divine power. And this is not for gods like Ra or Amun. These are for the God, the Creator God. They have words like the Creator, the Giver of Forms, the Merciful as an exclusively divine attribute, God of Truth, God of universal harmony, Ma'at, God of mankind, Lord, divinity of pre-existence, divinity from pre-existence, creation's God, and so forth. Ancient China, Vedic India, we find this phenomenon wherever we go. In Vedic India, ancient India, not Hindu India, pre-Hindu India, you have Prajpati, Lord of the Creator, of the creatures. You have Datar, the Creator. Vidatar, the regulator of things. Dartar, the manifest one. Tratar, the protector. Netar, the guide. You have the giver of forms, the animator, the reviver, the maker of all things. You have Ka, meaning who, meaning that he is unlike anything. He's not like anyone. And you have other names as well. I want to end this discursion by coming to the most beautiful word for God in the English language, which is the word God. And I want to emphasize the fact that the Anglo-Saxon word, God, is the most beautiful word in the English language. And this is a word which, among all Indo-European words for God, has the purest genealogy, has the highest descent. The word God in Indo-European, which is the ancient language from which Persian and Urdu and English and Greek and German and these other languages came, the word God in ancient Indo-European means he who is supplicated in prayer. He who is called upon in prayer. So that in terms of the semantics of the word God, it is as close to Allah, he who is worshipped by right, as any word. And I emphasize this because of the fact that we need to, I believe, we need to use the word God and we need to use the word Allah, both. And in proper context. Allah is the greatest name, but God is also a beautiful name. And it has no relationship with Trinity or incarnation or anything like that, although later on Trinitarian Christians used it for their triune God. It had no meaning like that initially, nor did it ever keep a meaning like that outside of the circles of the theologians. And the word Allah is the same way. The Jews, the Christians, the Sabaeans, they understood it in their own way. So it's very important for us when we speak in English, and especially when we speak in audiences with Jews and Christians, that we use the word God so that they know that this is a primordial faith. We are talking about the same being, and that we are heirs of that legacy in which they believe. We believe in God, and we should not feel that there's anything incorrect about that. Now, one of the great treasures of the English language is the poem Beowulf, which is the oldest Indo-European poem in Northern Europe, outside the Greeks and the Latins. This poem is one of the proofs of the verse in the Quran, وَأَمَّا مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسَ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ, that as for that which benefits mankind, it will remain in the earth forever. Beowulf was hidden for over 1,000 years, and then it was discovered. And this is a poem that has in it remnants of the primordial religion, the oneness of God. In it, there are over 30 different names of God. God is in the poem over 32 times. They call him God. King, Lord of majesty, measurer of fate, absolute ruler, giver of the decree, all-powerful Lord, owner, Lord of mankind, Lord of victories, King of wonders, King of glory, true King, Father, all-powerful Father. Father is a universal word which in our tradition was abrogated. But our scholars admit that it was used by other peoples, and it wasn't meant as a genetic father. All-powerful, creator of all, protector of mankind, guardian of wonders and glory, almighty, the judge of deeds, heaven's holder, ruler of the heavens, creator, giver of forms, king of life. This is in the order of the numbers of occurrence in the poem. And the word God comes out of this tradition, he who is supplicated by right. Now, in Beowulf, you see the religion of the oneness of God quite clearly. There's no idolatry in the poem. It's not Christian, and it's not Jewish. And in my belief, it's primordial. It's the old primordial faith of the Indo-Europeans. In one place, Beowulf says, from time to time, the pagans, the people who worshipped idols, would make vows at heathen shrines of idol sacrifices, pressing hard with words to relieve the people's distress. Such was their custom, the solace of heathens, intent upon hell, hell being an Indo-European word, in their hearts' minds. They knew not the measurer, they knew not the judge of deeds. They held no hopes for the Lord God. In no way, heaven's protector, knew they how to praise the Lord of majesty. Woe be to that human being who shall, through death's terrible affliction, thrust his soul into the fire's embrace, expecting no solace, however much he change. Well be for that one who may, after death's day, go to visit the Lord and enter the Father's embrace, asking peace. So this is the tradition out of which our word for God in the English language comes, and we need to respect that word. I will conclude now by referring to the first attribute of God, which is the attribute of existence. There are many words that indicate the attribute of existence. One of them is al-haq, the absolute, the ultimate, if you will, the necessary being. He whose being is firmly established above and before all things. Al-Haqqul Mubin in the Quran, the manifestly real. An-Nur, the light. This is also one of the words, the names of God that expresses existence. It also means the guide, because the light guides to the path. But also it means he who is the light, he who is the existent being, whose existence is principial. Al-Zahir, the evident, the apparent, the immanent, the manifestly real. Al-Batin, the hidden, the transcendent, the intrinsic, he whose being is hidden, just as it is also manifest. In Islamic theology, the theologians held that with regard to God, there could be no distinction between essence and existence. Existence and essence. His existence is principial. It is necessary. All that exists in the world is temporal. Whether it's the sun or the moon or the stars, whether it's the plant or the animal, all of these things begin in time. And temporal things are, in Arabic, hadith, huduth. Temporal things are those which do not exist and then they come into being. Temporality, which means to be in time, to exist in time. God does not exist in time. He is the Lord of time. He is the Lord of space. Those things that exist in time, which are all of the things that we know, they have a time when they do not exist. Then they have a time when they exist. Temporality is existence after nothingness. And in a world where all things are temporal, where nothing is eternal, nothing that we can touch or see, nothing that we can perceive, the existence of those things as a whole is impossible without the existence of one whose being has no beginning, who is al-awwal, the first, who is al-haq, the manifestly real. And this existence, which is the existence of God, is called necessary existence. So God was referred to in the Islamic theological tradition as the necessary being, he who principially must exist. The existence of the creation being impossible without his existence. And existence was designated as the very special attribute of that God with which it all begins. An attribute all by itself, an attribute that was alone, and one that when we think of God, we cannot conceive of Him except through that attribute. So the first attribute then is the attribute of existence. After that come the negative attributes or the negating attributes about which Imam Hamza will speak. Having run out of my time, I'll turn the podium over to him. Thank you very much.
This completes CD number 2.